Lieutenant Sarah Chen pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the maintenance shaft, her breathing carefully controlled. The alien patrol passed below her hiding spot, their three-legged gait creating an odd rhythm against the ship's deck plating. She had been hiding in the shadows of the captured human vessel for 6 months now, ever since the Zephyrian Empire had taken her ship and crew prisoner. The Zephyrians thought they had captured everyone during the battle at Proxima Station. They were wrong. Sarah had been in the engineering section when the boarding party arrived, and she had managed to slip into the ventilation system before they could find her. For half a year, she had lived like a ghost in her own ship, watching helplessly as her crewmates were taken away one by one for interrogation and experimentation. The aliens were curious about human physiology and psychology. They found humans fascinating in the worst possible way. Sarah had watched through hidden cameras as they tested human endurance, studied human reactions to fear, and tried to understand what made humans fight so desperately, even when defeat was certain. Her captain, Commander Rodriguez, had died during one of these experiments 3 months ago. The memory still burned in her chest like acid. But Sarah had not been idle during her months in hiding. She had learned the Zephyrian language by listening to their conversations. She had mapped every inch of the ship, including sections the aliens hadn't discovered yet. Most importantly, she had been sabotaging their operations in small, careful ways that couldn't be traced back to a human presence. A loose bolt here, a rerouted power coupling there, a corrupted data file in their systems. The Zephyrians blamed these problems on the ship's unfamiliar human technology. They never suspected that someone was actively working against them from within their own captured prize. Tonight was different, though. Sarah had overheard the alien commander discussing their arrival at the Zephyrian homeworld in 2 days. Once they reached their destination, her ship would be permanently docked and any chance of escape would vanish forever. Her remaining crewmates would disappear into alien research facilities, never to be seen again. She couldn't let that happen. Sarah crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel toward the ship's central computer core. She had been planning this moment for weeks, gathering the necessary components and writing the code she would need. The Zephyrians had made one critical mistake in their occupation of the human vessel. They had assumed that human technology was primitive compared to their own, so they had connected their advanced systems directly to the ship's computer network without proper security protocols. This gave Sarah access to everything. She reached the computer, terminal hidden behind a false panel in the engineering section. Her fingers moved quickly across the familiar human interface, uploading the program she had spent months perfecting. It was elegant in its simplicity, designed to look like a cascade failure in the ship's aging systems rather than deliberate sabotage. The program would work slowly at first, gradually corrupting the Zephyrian navigation systems while simultaneously feeding false data to their sensors. By the time they realized what was happening, they would be hopelessly lost in space, their weapons offline, and their communication systems broadcasting a distress signal on all human military frequencies. But the program needed time to work, and Sarah needed to buy that time by keeping the aliens distracted. She had one more card to play, something she had been saving for exactly this moment. Moving through the shadows like a predator, Sarah made her way to the ship's trophy room, where the Zephyrians displayed their conquered prizes. Among the collection of human artifacts and technology, they had placed the medals and commendations of her dead crewmates. Her captain's Medal of Valor sat in a place of honor, its golden surface reflecting the alien lighting. Sarah had earned her own Medal of Valor during the battle at Kepler Station 2 years ago, but she had never cared much about such things. Medals didn't bring back the dead or end wars. But now, looking at Captain Rodriguez's medal behind the alien display case, she understood something she had never grasped before. The medal wasn't about personal glory or recognition. It was about what it represented to others. It was a symbol of human courage, of the willingness to stand and fight even when hope seemed lost. The Zephyrians kept these medals as trophies, but they didn't understand their true power. Sarah smiled grimly as she activated the next phase of her plan. She had programmed the ship's internal communication system to broadcast a very specific message throughout the vessel. It was a recording she had made months ago, but had never dared to use until now. The message began to play on every speaker and display screen throughout the ship. It was the voice of Captain Rodriguez, recorded during his final interrogation session, but Sarah had edited it carefully, removing the alien questions and leaving only the captain's responses. To anyone listening, it sounded like a final message of defiance from a human officer who refused to surrender even in death. "This is Captain Miguel Rodriguez of the UES Prometheus. To any human forces receiving this transmission, know that we fought with honor. We may be prisoners, but we are not defeated. The human spirit cannot be broken by fear or pain or death. We are still here. We are still fighting, and we will never surrender." The effect was immediate. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship as confused Zephyrian guards tried to locate the source of the transmission. They ran through the corridors, checking every prison cell and interrogation room, unable to understand how a dead human could be speaking to them. While chaos erupted around her, Sarah slipped back into the shadows. Her program was now fully uploaded and beginning its work. The Zephyrians would be too busy searching for ghosts to notice the subtle changes beginning to affect their systems. But Sarah's real work was just beginning. She had spent 6 months learning everything she could about her captors, and now it was time to use that knowledge. The Zephyrians thought they understood humans, but they had only seen humans as victims and prisoners. They had never encountered a human who had chosen to become a hunter. The chaos from Captain Rodriguez's ghost message lasted for hours. Sarah watched from her hidden vantage points as Zephyrian security teams tore apart the ship searching for the impossible. They interrogated the remaining human prisoners with increasing desperation, unable to accept that their dead captive could somehow still be speaking. Commander Vexhall, the Zephyrian officer in charge of the captured vessel, gathered his staff in the main conference room. Sarah had tapped into their communication network weeks ago, so she could hear every word of their panicked discussion. "The human recording is impossible," Vexhall clicked in his native language, his 3 arms gesturing wildly. "Rodriguez died in Laboratory 7. I watched his vital signs cease myself. Perhaps their technology allows posthumous communication?" suggested Lieutenant Kethra, the ship's technical officer. "Human systems are primitive but sometimes unpredictable." "Or perhaps," said Dr. Yilmoth, the chief researcher, "one of our remaining subjects has technological abilities we have not yet discovered. Humans are remarkably resistant to standard interrogation techniques." Sarah almost laughed at their confusion. The Zephyrians were so convinced of their own superiority that they couldn't imagine a simple explanation for what had happened. They were looking for complex technological solutions when the answer was much simpler: a human with basic computer skills and 6 months to prepare. While the aliens debated impossible theories, Sarah's sabotage program continued its work. The navigation system was now showing their position as 3 light-years off their actual location. The weapons targeting computers were developing mysterious accuracy problems, and the communication array was slowly being reprogrammed to broadcast human military frequencies instead of Zephyrian ones. But Sarah knew that technical sabotage alone wouldn't be enough. She needed to strike at something more fundamental: the Zephyrians' confidence in their own dominance. They had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, but they had never encountered anything quite like humanity's stubborn refusal to accept defeat. She made her way to the detention level where her surviving crewmates were held. There were only 12 left out of the original crew of 43. The others had died during experiments or had been shipped off to research facilities on other worlds. Sarah had memorized every face, every name, every detail of their capture. The detention cells were guarded by automated systems rather than living sentries. The Zephyrians were confident that humans lacked the technical knowledge to bypass their security. They were wrong about that too. Sarah had spent weeks studying the cell controls, learning how they functioned and where their weaknesses lay. The locks were quantum encrypted, far beyond anything in human technology. But the power supply was standard Zephyrian engineering, and Sarah had learned to read their technical manuals like bedtime stories. She carefully rerouted power from the cell locks to the ship's waste processing system, making it look like a routine maintenance transfer. The locks would fail for exactly 47 seconds before backup power activated. That was enough time for what she had planned. Moving silently through the detention level, Sarah reached the cell containing Sergeant Martinez, her former security chief. Martinez was awake, sitting in meditation pose as he had done every night since their capture. His eyes opened as Sarah's shadow fell across his cell. "Chen," he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Stay quiet, Sarah breathed, her lips barely moving. Tomorrow night, when the lights dim for rest cycle, be ready. Pass the word to the others, but be careful. No names, no details. Just tell them that Rodriguez's ghost isn't finished talking. Martinez nodded slowly, understanding flooding his eyes. Sarah had already moved on to the next cell before he could respond. One by one, she visited each surviving crew member, delivering the same cryptic message. They were all smart enough to understand that rescue was coming, even if they didn't know the details. More importantly, they were all experienced enough to hide their sudden hope from their captors. As Sarah made her way back to her hiding place, she encountered an unexpected problem. A Zephyrian maintenance worker was inspecting the ventilation shaft she normally used to access the detention level. The alien's three eyes were scanning the tunnel with a handheld scanner, looking for signs of tampering. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, staying perfectly still. The Zephyrian was only meters away, close enough that she could smell the sulfur-like scent of his breathing apparatus. If he turned his scanner in her direction, he would detect her body heat immediately. But humans had one advantage that Zephyrians had never learned to account for: patience born of desperation. The alien species had conquered the galaxy through overwhelming technological superiority and coordinated military strikes. They had never needed to learn the art of waiting in perfect silence while death searched for them. Sarah had learned that art in the worst possible school. She had spent 6 months perfecting the ability to become invisible through sheer force of will, to slow her heartbeat and breathing, until she was barely alive. It was a skill that no Zephyrian could match because they had never needed to develop it. The maintenance worker finished his scan and moved on, never suspecting that a human predator had been watching him from arm's length away. When Sarah finally reached her hidden shelter deep in the ship's engineering section, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 of her plan was complete. The Zephyrians were confused. Their systems were compromised and her crew was ready for action. But the hardest part was yet to come. Tomorrow she would have to reveal herself to the enemy for the first time in 6 months. She would have to step out of the shadows and show the Zephyrians what a human could accomplish when driven beyond the breaking point. Sarah reached into her survival pack and pulled out the one possession she had managed to save from her quarters before going into hiding. It was her Medal of Valor from the battle at Kepler Station, the decoration she had never bothered to wear because it reminded her of friends who hadn't come home. Now, looking at the medal in the dim light of her hiding place, Sarah finally understood why humans fought so hard for these pieces of metal and ribbon. It wasn't about personal glory or recognition from superiors. It was about standing witness to the idea that some things were worth fighting for, even when victory seemed impossible. Tomorrow, the Zephyrians would learn that lesson the hard way. They had spent months studying human prisoners, trying to understand what made her species so stubbornly resistant to conquest. They were about to discover that they had been asking the wrong question all along. The question wasn't what made humans fight so hard when they were captured. The question was what happened when you gave a human 6 months to plan your destruction. The next day brought the first signs that Sarah's sabotage was taking effect. She watched through hidden cameras as Zephyrian technicians struggled with navigation errors and communication glitches. Their confident efficiency was being replaced by frustrated confusion as their advanced systems began failing in subtle but critical ways. Commander Vexhal called another emergency meeting, his 3 arms gesticulating angrily as he berated his technical staff. How can our navigation be off by 3 light years? These are military-grade quantum positioning systems, not primitive human instruments. Sir, Lieutenant Kethra replied nervously, our diagnostics show no hardware failures. The errors appear to be software-based, but we cannot locate the source code causing the problems. Then find it, Vexhal snapped. We reach the homeworld in 18 hours. If our positioning is wrong, we could emerge from hyperspace inside a star. Sarah smiled grimly from her hiding place. The navigation errors were actually much worse than they realized. Her program had been gradually corrupting their stellar cartography database, introducing tiny discrepancies that would compound over time. By the time they discovered the full extent of the damage, they would be hopelessly lost in uncharted space. But she couldn't wait for the navigation sabotage to complete its work. Tonight was her last chance to free her crew before they reached the Zephyrian homeworld. Once they were transferred to permanent research facilities, no rescue would be possible. As the ship's artificial night cycle began, Sarah made her final preparations. She had spent months gathering and modifying equipment for this moment. A plasma cutter salvaged from the maintenance shop, a jury-rigged communicator built from spare parts, and most importantly, her Medal of Valor, now attached to a small broadcasting device that would identify her to any human forces that might be listening. The plan was insane by any reasonable standard. Sarah was one person facing an entire ship full of aliens, each individually stronger and more technologically advanced than she was. But she had advantages that the Zephyrians couldn't understand or counter. She knew the ship better than they did. She had studied their psychology and tactics for 6 months, and she was fighting for something they had never experienced: the knowledge that death was preferable to surrender. Sarah made her way to the ship's power distribution center, located deep in the engineering section where the aliens rarely ventured. The massive fusion reactors that powered the vessel were controlled from this central hub, and Sarah had spent weeks learning how to manipulate their output. She began by gradually reducing power to non-essential systems throughout the ship. The Zephyrians would interpret this as another technical malfunction, rather than deliberate sabotage. Lighting dimmed in the corridors. Environmental controls began fluctuating. Elevator systems developed mysterious delays. More importantly, the power reduction affected the detention level's security systems. The quantum locks holding her crewmates required constant energy input to maintain their molecular integrity. As power levels dropped, the locks would automatically engage backup protocols that were far easier to bypass. While the ship's systems slowly degraded around them, the Zephyrian crew became increasingly frustrated and distracted. They were so focused on trying to fix their technical problems that they didn't notice one crucial detail. All the malfunctions were creating a pattern of distraction that drew guards and technicians away from the detention level. At exactly midnight, ship's time, Sarah put the next phase of her plan into action. She had programmed the ship's fire suppression system to activate in the main cargo bay, creating a massive emergency that would require immediate attention from the entire security team. Alarms blared throughout. The vessel, as Zephyrian firefighting teams rushed to, contained what appeared to be a catastrophic plasma leak. In the chaos, nobody noticed that the detention level was temporarily left with minimal security coverage. Sarah moved through the ship like a shadow given deadly purpose. She had memorized every corridor, every maintenance hatch, every blind spot in the surveillance network. The months of hiding had taught her to move without making a sound, to slip past sensors that weren't designed to detect someone who understood their weaknesses. She reached the detention level and began her work. The backup power systems for the cell locks were exactly where she expected them to be, protected by security panels that might have been challenging for a typical prisoner, but were child's play for someone who had spent 6 months studying Zephyrian engineering. One by one, the cell doors opened silently. Her crewmates emerged like ghosts, their faces gaunt from months of captivity but their eyes burning with the same fire that had kept Sarah alive in the darkness. Sergeant Martinez was the first to reach her. "What's the plan, Lieutenant?" he whispered. "We take back our ship," Sarah replied simply. "I've been compromising their systems for months. Their navigation is corrupted, their weapons are offline, and their communications are about to start broadcasting human military frequencies. All we need to do is survive long enough for help to arrive." "How long?" asked Corporal Williams, her former communications officer. 12 hours, maybe less. I sent out a distress signal 3 days ago. If any human forces are in this sector, they'll come running." The freed crew members looked at each other with a mixture of hope and disbelief. They had all given up the possibility of rescue months ago. The idea that Sarah had been working toward their freedom all this time seemed almost too good to believe. "What do we use for weapons?" Martinez asked practically. Sarah smiled and led them to a maintenance closet she had prepared weeks ago. Inside were a dozen improvised weapons built from ship components and Zephyrian tools. Plasma cutters modified for combat use, magnetic accelerators made from spare parts, and something the aliens would never expect: human ingenuity applied to the art of war. "The Zephyrians have been studying us for months," Sarah explained as her crew armed themselves. "They think they understand human psychology and tactics. They're wrong. They've only seen us as prisoners and test subjects. They've never faced humans who were free to fight on their own terms." "What about their superior numbers and technology?" asked Dr. Patel, the ship's medical officer. Numbers don't matter when the enemy doesn't know you're coming, Sarah replied. And their technology is only superior when it works properly. I've been very carefully making sure it doesn't. As if to emphasize her point, the lights throughout the detention level suddenly went out, plunging the area into complete darkness. A moment later, emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in a red glow that would make it difficult for Zephyrian eyes to see clearly. How did you do that? Williams asked in amazement. I've had 6 months to learn every system on this ship, Sarah said. The Zephyrians think they captured a human vessel, but they don't really understand human technology. They connected their systems to ours without proper security protocols. That was their first mistake. What was their second mistake? Martinez asked. Sarah's smile was cold and predatory in the emergency lighting. They left one of us alive long enough to get angry. The time for hiding was over. Sarah had spent half a year learning everything she could about her enemies, preparing for this moment when she would finally step out of the shadows. The Zephyrians were about to discover that they had made a critical error in their understanding of human nature. They thought they had captured and broken a ship full of primitive aliens. Instead, they had given one very determined human soldier 6 months to plan their destruction. Now it was time to collect the debt they owed for Captain Rodriguez and all the others who had died in their experiments. The first Zephyrian patrol to discover the empty detention cells never had a chance to report their findings. Sarah's crew moved with the deadly efficiency of soldiers who had spent months planning their revenge. They struck from the shadows, using the ship's maintenance tunnels and service corridors to appear where the aliens least expected them. Sergeant Martinez led the assault team with brutal precision. The improvised weapons Sarah had prepared worked exactly as designed, cutting through Zephyrian armor and shields like they were made of paper. The aliens' technological superiority meant nothing when they were caught completely off guard by enemies who weren't supposed to exist. Control room secured, Martinez reported through the jury-rigged communicator Sarah had built. 4 hostiles neutralized, no casualties on our side. Engineering section clear, added Corporal Williams from another part of the ship. Their technical teams never saw us coming, Sarah. Herself had taken the most dangerous assignment, the bridge where Commander Vexhal and his senior staff were still trying to understand why their ship was falling apart around them. She crawled through the ventilation system above the command center, listening to their increasingly panicked discussions. The human prisoners have escaped, Lieutenant Kethra was reporting. Security teams 3 and 7 are not responding to communication attempts. Impossible, Vexhal replied, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. Humans lack the technical knowledge to bypass our security systems. And they have no weapons. Sir, Dr. Yilmoth interrupted nervously. Perhaps we have underestimated their capabilities. Our research has focused on their physical and psychological responses to captivity. We may not have adequately studied their capacity for technological adaptation. Sarah smiled coldly as she listened to their fear. The Zephyrians were finally beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake, but it was far too late to correct it. She dropped through a ceiling panel directly behind Vexahal's command chair, her modified plasma cutter humming to life. The aliens spun around in shock, their 3 eyes widening as they saw a human female they had assumed was long dead. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, UES Prometheus, she announced calmly. I formally demand the surrender of this vessel and the immediate release of all human prisoners. Vexhal's shock quickly turned to rage. How is this possible? We searched this ship completely. You searched for prisoners, Sarah corrected. You never looked for a predator. The Zephyrian commander reached for his sidearm, but Sarah was faster. Her plasma cutter sliced through his weapon before he could draw it, leaving his 3 arms empty and trembling. Your ship is surrounded, Vexhal lied desperately. A human rescue will never reach you in time. Actually, Sarah replied, touching the broadcasting device attached to her Medal of Valor. They're already here, as if summoned by her words. The ship's communication system suddenly crackled to life with a transmission that made every Zephyrian on the bridge freeze in terror. This is Admiral Morrison of the UES Defiance to the Zephyrian vessel holding human prisoners. You are surrounded by 6 heavy cruisers and 12 destroyers. Surrender immediately or face the consequences. The bridge erupted in chaos as Zephyrian officers ran to their sensor stations, only to discover that their detection systems were showing nothing but empty space. Their confusion turned to horror as they realized what had happened. "Our sensors have been compromised," Lieutenant Kethra reported in a shaking voice. "We cannot detect the human fleet's position or strength." "Because I've been feeding you false data for months," Sarah explained cheerfully. "Your sensors are telling you exactly what I want them to tell you. For all you know, there could be 1,000 human ships out there, or there could be none at all." The psychological effect was devastating. The Zephyrians had built their empire on the certainty of their technological superiority. The idea that a primitive human could have been manipulating their advanced systems for months was so alien to their worldview that it paralyzed their ability to respond effectively. "This is impossible," Dr. Yilmoth whispered. "Human technology is centuries behind our own. How could one female accomplish such extensive sabotage?" "You studied us like laboratory animals," Sarah replied, her voice carrying all the anger she had accumulated during 6 months of hiding. "You thought you understood human psychology because you could make us scream and bleed. But you never bothered to learn the most important thing about my species." "Which is?" Vexhall asked, though he seemed afraid to hear the answer. "We adapt." Sarah's smile was like a knife. "You gave me 6 months to study your technology, your language, your tactics, and your weaknesses. You taught me everything I needed to know to destroy you, and you never even realized you were doing it." The truth was beginning to dawn on the Zephyrian command staff. They had captured what they thought was a primitive human vessel, but they had actually trapped themselves with one of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, a human with unlimited time to prepare and nothing left to lose. "What do you want?" Vexhall finally asked. "Justice," Sarah replied simply. "For Captain Rodriguez, for my crew, for every human who died screaming in your laboratories." "The human fleet," Lieutenant Kethra interrupted urgently. "They are demanding an immediate response to their surrender ultimatum." Sarah checked her chronometer. "You have 30 seconds to decide. Surrender unconditionally, or find out what happens when humans stop playing by civilized rules." The Zephyrians looked at each other with growing panic. Their weapon systems were offline, their navigation was corrupted, and they were potentially surrounded by an enemy fleet they couldn't even detect. Worse, they were trapped on a ship with freed human prisoners who had every reason to want revenge. "We surrender," Vexhall said quietly. "Louder," Sarah demanded. "I want every Zephyrian on this ship to hear you admit defeat." "This is Commander Vexhall," the alien announced over the ship's communication system. "I formally surrender this vessel to human forces. All Zephyrian personnel will comply with human orders until proper custody transfer can be arranged." The response from Sarah's crew was immediate and enthusiastic. Cheers echoed through the corridors as her freed comrades secured the remaining Zephyrian positions. After months of captivity and experimentation, they were finally free. But Sarah felt no triumph, only a cold satisfaction that justice was finally being served. She touched her Medal of Valor again, thinking of Captain Rodriguez and all the others who hadn't lived to see this moment. "There's one more thing," she told Vexhall. "That human fleet Admiral Morrison mentioned? They really are out there. I've been broadcasting our position on human military frequencies for 3 days. They should be arriving any minute now." As if summoned by her words, the ship's real sensors suddenly detected the massive energy signatures of human warships dropping out of hyperspace around them. This time the readings were genuine. The cavalry had arrived just as Sarah had planned. But the real victory had already been won by one determined human who had refused to surrender, even when surrender seemed like the only option left. The Zephyrians were about to learn why humans had spread across half the galaxy, despite their primitive technology. It wasn't because they were the strongest or the smartest species in the universe. It was because they never knew when to quit. Admiral Morrison materialized on the bridge of the captured Zephyrian vessel in a swirl of blue light, flanked by a full squad of human marines in combat armor. His weathered face showed the kind of grim satisfaction that came from rescuing his own people from impossible odds. "Lieutenant Chen," he said simply, his eyes taking in the scene of surrendered aliens and freed prisoners, "I'm damn glad to see you alive." Sarah straightened to attention, suddenly aware that she was still wearing the torn and dirty survival gear she had lived in for 6 months. Her Medal of Valor caught the light, now attached to the improvised broadcasting device that had helped coordinate the rescue. "Admiral," she replied formally, "I have the honor to report that the UES Prometheus has been retaken from hostile forces." All surviving crew members are accounted for. Morrison's expression softened as he looked around the bridge at the 12 remaining members of what had once been a crew of 43. How many did we lose, Lieutenant? 31 confirmed casualties, sir. Most died during alien experimentation and interrogation sessions. Sarah's voice remained steady, but her hands clenched into fists as she spoke. The Admiral's face hardened as he turned to look at Commander Vexhall and the other Zephyrian officers. Is that so? Well, gentlemen, it seems we have a great deal to discuss about your species' treatment of prisoners of war. We demand protection under the Galactic Convention for Treatment of Captured Military Personnel, Vexhall said quickly, his 3 arms trembling. Funny thing about that, Morrison replied coldly. The convention only applies to signatories who actually follow its rules. Torturing and experimenting on prisoners tends to void those protections. He turned back to Sarah. I want a full report on what happened here. Lieutenant, everything, over the next hour. Sarah detailed the months of systematic abuse and murder that had taken place aboard her ship. She showed Morrison the laboratory where her crewmates had died, the cells where the survivors had been held, and the research data the Zephyrians had collected from their experiments on human physiology and psychology. The Admiral's expression grew darker with each revelation. Behind him, the Marine Squad leader was making notes on a tactical pad, documenting evidence that would be used in future war crimes proceedings. And during all this, Morrison said finally, you were living in the ship's infrastructure, planning your revenge? Planning our rescue, sir, Sarah corrected. Revenge was just a pleasant side effect. Morrison actually smiled at that. 6 months of sabotage and psychological warfare, culminating in the complete capture of an enemy vessel. That's either the most impressive act of individual heroism I've ever seen, or the most terrifying example of human stubbornness in recorded history. Probably both. Sir? The Admiral walked over to where Sarah's Medal of Valor was still attached to her improvised broadcasting device. This how you identified yourself to our rescue force? Yes, sir. The medal's unique quantum signature showed up on our deep-range sensors when you activated the emergency beacon. That's how we knew there were still humans alive on this ship. Sarah nodded. I never thought much of medals before, sir. Seemed like pieces of metal that couldn't bring back the dead. She paused, looking around at her freed crewmates. But I understand now. It's not about personal glory. It's about standing witness to the idea that some things are worth fighting for. No matter how impossible the odds, that's exactly right. Lieutenant, Morrison detached the medal from the broadcasting device and pinned it properly to Sarah's survival gear. And speaking of standing witness, I have some news that I think you'll appreciate. He activated his personal communicator, and the bridge filled with the sound of Admiral Morrison's voice addressing what was obviously a much larger audience. All ships, this is Morrison. Operation Ghostwalker is complete. Lieutenant Sarah Chen and the surviving crew of the UES Prometheus have been successfully recovered after 6 months of captivity. The enemy vessel has been captured intact, along with valuable intelligence on Zephyrian military capabilities and war crimes documentation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ship after ship reported in, offering congratulations and requesting permission to visit the rescued crew. Sarah realized with growing amazement that she was listening to the voices of an entire human battle fleet. How many ships, sir? She asked quietly. 47 vessels, Morrison replied with satisfaction. 6 different task forces diverted from their assignments when we received your distress signal. Turns out the Navy takes a very dim view of people experimenting on our personnel. Commander Vexhall overheard this exchange, and his 3 eyes widened in shock. 47 ships? For 12 human prisoners? 43 human prisoners, Morrison corrected coldly. We honor our dead as much as our living, and you're about to learn a very important lesson about human military doctrine, which is, Dr. Yilmoth asked nervously. We don't leave our people behind ever, even when it's impractical, expensive, or tactically disadvantageous. Even when the prisoners in question are presumed dead. We come for them anyway because that's what humans do. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. For 6 months she had fought alone against impossible odds, sustained only by the hope that help would eventually come. Now she understood that her faith had been justified. The cavalry really did always arrive, sometimes late but never absent. What happens now, sir? Asked Sergeant Martinez. Now, Morrison said grimly. We have some very serious discussions with the Zephyrian Empire about their treatment of prisoners. This ship contains enough evidence of war crimes to justify some very harsh diplomatic consequences. He turned to address the captured aliens directly. Your species has made a critical error in judgment. You thought you could experiment on humans with impunity because we seemed primitive and weak. What you failed to understand is that humans consider an attack on one of us to be an attack on all of us. But we are a much larger empire, Vexhal protested weakly. Our military forces outnumber yours by factors of thousands. Numbers don't win wars, Sarah interjected, speaking for the first time since the Admiral's arrival. Determination wins wars, and you've just given every human in the galaxy a very personal reason to be determined. Morrison nodded approvingly. Lieutenant Chen speaks for all of us. The Zephyrian Empire has just learned the most important rule of galactic politics. Don't mess with humans unless you're prepared for the consequences. As if to emphasize his point, the ship's communication system activated with another transmission from the human fleet. Admiral Morrison, this is Captain Torres of the UES Retribution. We're receiving surrender requests from 3 more Zephyrian vessels in the outer system. Apparently word is spreading about what happened here. Morrison looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. Lieutenant, I think your 6 months of preparation may have just prevented a full-scale war. The Zephyrians are smart enough to recognize when they've picked a fight they can't win. Sarah thought about Captain Rodriguez, about her dead crewmates, about the months of hiding and planning and burning rage that had sustained her through the darkest times. The metal on her chest felt heavier now, weighted with the memory of everyone who hadn't lived to see this moment. With respect, sir, she said quietly, I think the war was prevented the moment the Zephyrians realized they had made one critical mistake. Which was? Sarah's smile was cold and satisfied. They left one of us alive long enough to get really, really angry. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself standing in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Terran Defense Council, wearing a crisp new uniform with her Medal of Valor properly displayed alongside several new decorations. The hall was packed with military officials, government representatives, and journalists from across human space. The story of the ghost of Prometheus had spread like wildfire through human territory and beyond. Sarah's 6-month campaign of sabotage and psychological warfare had become legendary, studied in military academies and told in bars wherever human soldiers gathered. But she still felt uncomfortable with the attention. Ladies and gentlemen, announced Admiral Morrison from the podium, it is my honor to present Lieutenant Sarah Chen for the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest decoration for heroism that our species can bestow. The audience rose in thunderous applause as Sarah walked to the stage. She had requested that her surviving crewmates be recognized first, and Sergeant Martinez and the others had already received their own decorations for valor under fire. But this moment belonged to her alone. Secretary of Defense Williams, a stern woman with iron-gray hair, stepped forward to place the medal around Sarah's neck. Lieutenant Chen, she said in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, your actions represent the very best of human courage and ingenuity. You faced impossible odds and refused to surrender, not just for your own survival, but for the lives of your comrades and the honor of our species. As the medal settled against her chest, Sarah thought about the months of hiding, planning, and desperate hope that had led to this moment. The weight of the decoration was nothing compared to the weight of memory, but somehow that made it more meaningful rather than less. More importantly, the secretary continued, your actions have fundamentally changed the balance of power in this sector of the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire has agreed to comprehensive peace negotiations and reparations for war crimes. 3 other hostile species have requested non-aggression pacts with humanity. Your refusal to surrender has made our entire species safer. The applause was deafening, but Sarah barely heard it. She was remembering Captain Rodriguez's final words to her, recorded during his last interrogation session. Take care of the crew. Chen, don't let them break you. She had kept that promise, even when it seemed impossible. After the ceremony, Sarah found herself at a reception surrounded by admirers and well-wishers. Military analysts wanted to understand her tactics. Politicians wanted to pose for photographs. Journalists wanted exclusive interviews about her experience. But the conversation that mattered most came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Kethra, the former Zephyrian technical officer who had been aboard the captured ship, approached her during a quiet moment. The alien had requested political asylum with human authorities after witnessing the war crimes committed by his own people. He now served as a liaison between the two species, helping to negotiate the peace settlement that had emerged from Sarah's actions. "Lieutenant Chen," he said in carefully pronounced human words, "I wanted to speak with you personally." Sarah turned to face the three-eyed alien who had once been her enemy. "Ambassador, I understand you've been helpful in the peace negotiations." "I have tried to be," Kethra replied, "but that is not why I wished to speak with you." "I wanted to apologize, and for what?" "For not understanding," the alien said simply. "My people have conquered dozens of species across the galaxy. We always assumed that our technological superiority made us inherently superior beings. We never considered that other species might possess qualities we lacked entirely." Sarah studied the alien's earnest expression, such as the ability to endure the unendurable, the willingness to sacrifice everything for abstract principles like honor and loyalty, the capacity to transform despair into determination. Kethra paused, his three eyes focusing on Sarah's new medal. "We studied your people for months, trying to understand what made you so difficult to break. We measured your physical responses, analyzed your psychological profiles, documented your technological capabilities, but we never understood the most important thing, which was that you were not specimens to be studied. You were individuals choosing how to respond to impossible circumstances, and the choice you made taught us more about the nature of courage than all our research combined." Sarah considered this for a long moment. "Your people aren't evil, Ambassador. You were just operating from false assumptions about the nature of strength." "Perhaps," Kethra agreed, "but the results were still evil, regardless of our intentions. 31 of your crewmates died because of our ignorance and arrogance. That debt can never be fully repaid." "No," Sarah said quietly, "but it can be honored by making sure it never happens again." "Indeed. That is why I have dedicated my life to building understanding between our species. Your actions have created an opportunity for peace, but peace must be actively maintained by people of goodwill on both sides." The alien ambassador left her with that thought, and Sarah spent the rest of the evening reflecting on the strange turns her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been a mid-ranking officer on a routine patrol mission. Now she was being hailed as a hero whose actions had changed the course of galactic history. But the real change, she realized, was not in her circumstances but in her understanding of what heroism actually meant. It wasn't about personal glory or dramatic gestures. It was about making the choice to keep fighting when surrender seemed reasonable, to keep hoping when hope seemed foolish, to keep faith with your principles when the whole universe seemed to be working against them. Later that night, Sarah stood alone on the observation deck of the space station where the ceremony had been held. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, she could see the lights of human ships moving through the void, carrying out the everyday business of a civilization that was no longer under threat. She touched her Medal of Honor, thinking about all the people who had made this moment possible. Captain Rodriguez, who had died rather than reveal tactical information to the enemy. Her surviving crewmates who had endured months of captivity without breaking. Admiral Morrison and the 47 ships that had come to their rescue. Even Ambassador Kethra, who had chosen conscience over loyalty to his own species. Heroes, all of them, in their own way. Sarah had spent 6 months hiding in the shadows, invisible and forgotten, sustained only by determination and hope. But the medal around her neck wasn't really about her individual actions. It was about the collective strength of a species that refused to abandon its people, even when rescue seemed impossible. She thought about the words Captain Rodriguez had spoken during his final interrogation, words that had become a rallying cry for human forces throughout the sector. The human spirit cannot be broken by fear or pain or death. We are still here. We are still fighting, and we will never surrender. Those words had proven to be more than just defiant rhetoric. They had been a promise, and Sarah had spent 6 months making sure that promise was kept. Now, standing in the light of human ships and wearing the highest honor her species could bestow, Sarah finally understood the true meaning of the medal she wore. It wasn't a reward for individual heroism. It was a reminder that sometimes, when everything seems lost, one person's refusal to surrender can change the course of history. 5 years after the rescue of the UES Prometheus, Sarah stood in the lecture hall of the Advanced Tactical Academy on Mars, addressing a class of young officers who had been children when her story first made headlines. The years had been kind to her. though her eyes still carried the weight of memory from those 6 months in hiding. The most important lesson from the Prometheus incident, she told her students, is not about sabotage techniques or psychological warfare. It's about understanding what makes humans uniquely effective in impossible situations. A young cadet raised her hand. "Ma'am, was it really true that you lived in the ventilation system for 6 months without being detected?" Sarah smiled. "That's what the official reports say, Cadet Morrison." She had learned that the young woman was Admiral Morrison's daughter, carrying on the family tradition of military service. But the more important question is why I was able to survive that long when, by all logic, I should have been captured or killed within days. "Because you're incredibly skilled and determined?" suggested another cadet. "No," Sarah replied firmly, "because I had something worth surviving for. I had crewmates depending on me, and I had a promise to keep to my dead captain. Individual skill and determination are important, but they're not enough by themselves. You need a reason that's bigger than your own survival." She walked to the holographic display at the front of the classroom, bringing up a tactical diagram of the captured Zephyrian vessel. "Look at this ship layout. The aliens had superior technology, superior numbers, and complete control of the environment. By every reasonable military calculation, my situation was hopeless. So why did you succeed where tactics said you should have failed?" asked Cadet Morrison. "Because the Zephyrians made the same mistake that many of our enemies make. They assumed that humans think like them. They believed that superior force would lead to inevitable surrender, because that's how their own psychology works." Sarah highlighted several sections of the ship diagram. They never considered that humans might respond to hopeless odds by getting more determined rather than less. The classroom was silent as the students absorbed this lesson. These young officers would soon be leading their own crews into dangerous situations, and Sarah wanted them to understand the principles that had saved her life and her crew. The galaxy is full of species that are stronger than us, smarter than us, more technologically advanced than us, Sarah continued. But very few of them understand the concept of fighting harder when the odds get worse. That's our edge, and it's why humanity has not only survived but thrived among the stars. After the class ended, Sarah made her way to her office where she found an unexpected visitor waiting for her. Ambassador Kethra, now significantly older and bearing the scars of political battles fought in council chambers rather than battlefields, rose to greet her with the formal bow that had become customary between them. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen," he said in his now fluent human speech. "I hope you have time for an old friend." "Always, Ambassador." Sarah gestured to a chair designed to accommodate his alien physiology. "What brings you to Mars?" "Several things," Kethra replied, settling into the chair with the careful movements of advancing age. "First, I wanted to inform you that the Zephyrian Council has voted to establish a memorial for the crew members who died aboard the Prometheus. It will be erected on our homeworld, where future generations will learn about the consequences of treating other sentient beings as experimental subjects." Sarah felt a tightness in her throat. "That's unexpected and appreciated. It was the least we could do," the alien said simply. "But I also came to tell you about something more immediate. The Council has received a request from the hegemony of Karthak for advice on dealing with human prisoners." Sarah's expression hardened. The Karthak were a militant species that had been expanding aggressively in the Outer Rim territories, bringing them into conflict with human colonies and patrol fleets. "What kind of advice?" "The kind that suggests they are considering the same research programs that my people once conducted," Kethra said grimly. "They have captured several human crews and are apparently planning to study human psychological and physical responses to various stimuli." "And the Zephyrian Council's response?" "We told them in the strongest possible terms that such actions would be profoundly inadvisable." The alien's three eyes focused intently on Sarah. "We shared certain historical records about what happened the last time someone tried to conduct experiments on human prisoners." Sarah leaned back in her chair, understanding the implications immediately. "You told them about the Prometheus." "We told them about you," Kethra corrected. "About 6 months of systematic sabotage that crippled a military vessel. About freed prisoners who fought like demons for their revenge. About a rescue fleet of 47 ships that appeared out of nowhere to collect 12 survivors." "And their response?" "They thanked us for the historical perspective and indicated that they would reconsider their research proposals." Kethra's expression was as close to a smile as his alien features could manage. It seems that your reputation has become something of a deterrent to potential war crimes. Sarah considered this for a long moment. You know what the strangest part is? I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to get my crew home safely. But that's precisely why your story has such power, the ambassador replied. You didn't set out to become a legend or change the course of galactic politics. You simply refused to abandon your people no matter how impossible the situation became. That kind of pure motivation is rare enough to be inspiring and common enough to be imitated. Meaning that human military personnel across the galaxy now know that rescue will come, no matter how long it takes or how impossible the odds seem. And potential enemies know that capturing humans for research purposes is likely to result in consequences far beyond anything they're prepared to handle. Sarah touched the Medal of Honor that she still wore on her daily uniform, a habit she had maintained for 5 years. Captain Rodriguez would have been amazed to know that his final words would become a rallying cry for the entire human military. What was it he said again? Kethra asked. The human spirit cannot be broken by fear or pain or death. We are still here. We are still fighting. And we will never surrender. Sarah repeated the words that had sustained her through the darkest months of her life. Those words have been inscribed on memorial walls, painted on ship hulls, and tattooed on the arms of soldiers who never knew Rodriguez personally, but understand what he represented. He represented the same thing you do, the ambassador said quietly. The idea that some principles are worth any sacrifice, and that humans will endure any hardship to protect those principles. Is that really so unusual among galactic species? More unusual than you might think, Kethra replied sadly. Most species, including my own, are fundamentally practical. We fight when we can win, surrender when we cannot, and make whatever compromises are necessary for survival. The concept of choosing death over dishonor is alien to us. Sarah looked out the window of her office at the red landscape of Mars, where human terraforming efforts were slowly creating a second Earth. In the distance, she could see the lights of military training facilities where young officers were learning the lessons that her experience had taught. Maybe that's why we've been so successful out here, she said thoughtfully. The galaxy is full of practical species making practical decisions. When humans show up and start making impractical decisions based on abstract principles, it throws everyone off balance. Indeed, Kethra agreed. Your species has become known for making choices that are simultaneously foolish and admirable. Rescuing stranded crews at enormous cost, refusing profitable surrender terms in favor of hopeless last stands, risking entire fleets to save individual soldiers. And that reputation protects us? It terrifies potential enemies, the ambassador said bluntly. Who wants to fight a species that considers death preferable to defeat? The Karthak asked us what humans would do if their prisoners were tortured and killed. We told them the truth. Humans would hunt down everyone responsible and make them pay regardless of the cost or the odds. Sarah smiled grimly. So my 6 months of hiding in air ducts has become a cautionary tale for the entire galaxy. Your 6 months of refusing to surrender has become proof that humans cannot be broken by conventional means, Kethra corrected. That's a powerful deterrent to anyone considering testing human resolve. As the old alien prepared to leave, Sarah realized that her story had taken on a life of its own, becoming something larger than the personal struggle it had once been. She had thought she was just trying to save her crew, but her actions had apparently sent a message that echoed across the stars. The message was simple. Humans don't stay down. They get back up, they adapt, and they find a way to win even when victory seems impossible. 5 years later, that message was still protecting human lives and preventing conflicts across the galaxy. Sometimes the most important battles were won not through force of arms, but through the simple act of refusing to surrender when surrender seemed like the only rational choice. Captain Rodriguez had been right all along. The human spirit really couldn't be broken.